Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Arts and Recreation Committee Policies Committee, meeting number 022-2024 on this Thursday, February 22nd. It's 6 p.m. Mr. Clerk, do we have quorum?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I can confirm we do indeed have quorum. Currently absent from the committee are Councillors Amos and Bone.
Thank you. Could I have a mover and seconder for the approval of the agenda? Councillor Ridge and Councillor Stephen. All those in favor? Passed. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes, that the minutes of the Arts and Recreation Committee Policies Committee meeting number 01-2024 held Wednesday, December 13th, 2023 be approved. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Stephen and Councillor Sanik. All those in favor? Passed. Thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing no movement, move on. There are no delegations today. There are no briefings. We only have one item of business, which is the Child Care and Early Years Review. The report of the Commissioner of Community Services, ARCP-24-003, was attached. And if we could have some staff to brief us, please. Would this be Director Ruth Norgard? Thank you.
Thank you, and to you, Mr. Chair. So thanks for allowing us to provide you with an update on this important part of the Housing and Social Services Department and our role as a service manager in Kingston and Frontenac. I also want to take an opportunity to introduce my colleague Heather Mitchell, who is with me tonight. Heather is the manager of social assistance and early years, so is integral in kind of managing both the social assistance and childcare portfolio. We thought it was important for this committee because I know you see a lot of our department on the housing and homelessness side, but obviously the childcare and early years part of our department is crucial. I think councillors do receive lots of questions from constituents on childcare. There's been lots of changes over the last few years. Ms. Mitchell mainly worked hard on compiling an overview of all the different parts of our role, our ways of supporting the system, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, and I thought this would be a good way of giving the committee an update of our role. Happy to answer any questions, provide any context, and hopefully this will be the first of kind of a bit of an ongoing communication on the system and how we're doing in the community. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Councillor Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you to staff for this report. This has been indeed a question that I've received a lot. And I would argue that this is really impacting women. It's a conversation that's come up when we talk about recruiting family doctors. And we know that just quality childcare is critical if people are going to leave their children, because that's really difficult to do. You have to trust someone and to be able to go into the workforce in whatever capacity that looks like. So I had a question to start. You, in the report, it indicated there are 34 licensed childcare operators at 74 sites, and 20 of those are nonprofit and 14 are commercial business. And I was wondering, could you explain to me what the difference is between nonprofit and commercial childcare? Because to me, it kind of sounds like a two-tiered system. So I just wanted to hear what you think about that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Stephen. In many ways, there is no difference between for-profit and not-for-profit. It's not like we're treating one any differently than the other. They're all entitled to the same funding envelopes. We treat them all the same way in terms of what the expectations are, how they operate. It's all across the board. The reason we differentiate between the two is the Ministry of Education requires that we have a threshold of for-profit to our nonprofit. So we are only allowed to fund a maximum of 30% of our childcare centers as for-profit. The others have to be not-for-profit.
Okay, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So I have, maybe it's the language, I don't know, but it strikes me that there is a difference if one of these is for profit and one of these is not for profit. Who gets the profits? Do we know that?
Profit centers are privately owned and operated. They're businesses. Those not-for-profits are not-for-profit agencies or centers that work with boards of directors and are more community-focused.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I realize this isn't a staff thing. It's just, I don't know, it's an observation and it just sort of strikes me. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Sorry, Mr. Chair, was Ms. Nordegraaf wanting to speak?
Thank you. And just to add to what Ms. Mitchell mentioned, again, the service will be the same. There is the same accountability framework. There is also still the same kind of auditing requirements for across the board. It just is, again, we are mandated to kind of follow through a certain percentage through the province. And frankly, there is also obviously there is a need for childcare centers. There's some really great for-profit ones and some really great not-for-profit ones. I think we're really just, as a service manager, we have the same kind of accountability mechanisms in place. We're not, again, treating them different. It's just a business model. Yeah, I will leave it with that.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, again, it sounds like another case where provincial policy is impacting municipal services and things that we do here. Another question I had, so I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So in the report, it talked about 4,969 licensed spots here in, I think it's like Kingston and Frontenac, or it might have been just Kingston, but 1,687, that's our current operating capacity for a variety of reasons. So if my math is right, we're operating at like 34% capacity in our region. Is that correct? And if so, could you speak to that a bit?
I'll start, and I think Ms. Mitchell will add to this as well, because it's definitely, I think it will help to kind of maybe provide a bit of context and also moving forward to kind of separate these numbers out a bit. So the big kind of the total number of pretty much close to 5,000 spots are all spots, including before and after spots. The before and after spots are licensed mainly in various schools, and the school system will license through the Ministry of Education as many rooms as they can have in their school, for instance, their gyms and their classes, so they can be as nimble as possible with kind of utilizing the space. So you could be in a situation where, and don't quote me on these numbers, but that a school may have 250 licensed before and after spaces, but realistically is only using 30 or 40 of them because they need nimbleness to use classrooms that are licensed. Let's say a teacher has a parent-teacher interview and will use this specific classroom, then kids can go to another classroom. So that's the biggest kind of like quote-unquote unused licensed space. So I think what we want to do as staff is actually go back and maybe kind of clarify what the different numbers, what the different groups look like. That we cannot really change. That's a way to get the schools to be as I would say creative as possible with utilizing their space for before and after. A couple of the kind of key challenges with some of the unused license, because there's some other parts of it, is obviously in the full day childcare, so the infants, the toddlers, the kinders, we continue to see staffing challenges. So there certainly are empty spots that could be filled should there be more staff. I think we have continued to speak to that, and I know Ms. Mitchell and her team are working really hard with partners on supporting workforce development, wages, et cetera, but that probably will take, again, some continued effort and time to really kind of stabilize the ECE sector. And then there's also, for instance, should there be a B&A license space that's empty, it's hard to recruit for those spots because they're often shifts, like a few hours in the morning, a few hours at night. And then I feel like I'm missing one more area. I don't want to put you on the spot here. Oh, yes, the fees. So we do, again, we have some centers where the parent fees are quite high. So that's where, you know, some of these spots are not utilized fully. So I guess to summarize, again, the number between the kind of the 5,000-ish and the utilization of close to 2, a large chunk of that is basically like a quote-unquote over-licensed number in the B&A at schools. But I think moving forward, and as I mentioned, we would like to kind of be sharing more proactively kind of updates on the data. I think we will do a bit of a deeper dive on that number so you have a good understanding of different areas within that number. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That does help. It's complicated, but the difference between those numbers was quite striking. I'm very curious about the before and after piece because, again, in the report, I know it mentioned about location, like you would mentioned about, you know, a teacher maybe needing their classroom or whatever. But I think from my experience in schools, I would think that your comment about staffing in the split shifts is probably bang on, that it's really hard to get people to cover those, more so maybe than the space factor in a school. Mr. Chair, I have 2 more questions, but if you want to let other members speak first, I can wait and come back to them.
Continue on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So through you, I was just looking at the special needs resourcing piece. And again, through school experience, you know, inclusion is a beautiful and necessary idea. It's something I believe in strongly. And I also know that it doesn't work unless you have the proper supports in place. So it sounds like a change was made, and I just wanted to check that I understand. I think the way my interpretation is that the way it used to be is that the Ministry of Education would give funding to the city for the special needs resourcing, which would then turn around, and there's a connection with community living here. And so I wasn't sure if the city was paying community living or paying the childcare providers who were paying community living, but it sounds like the city is now removed from that. Is that right? Just to try and simplify and not be the middleman there?
So with special needs resourcing, we have 2 ways in which we administer that program. So we have one child care center who provides a special needs resource consultant right on site in their center. And that is an option that's available to any number of operators who wish to have that resource right on site. And we could fund that position as long as the position is falling within the criteria of the Ministry of Education. But what we've done is we have Community Living Kingston is contracted to provide special needs resource consultants to childcare centers in the community. So they go out and they assess what's happening within the classroom environment and what supports are needed. And really the focus of the ministry is on building the capacity of the staff within the center to be able to manage all of the children and be able to keep everyone within the classroom. One-on-one supports is in contradiction of the goal of the ministry. So we do have a model that allows for what we call enhanced support dollars to provide extra hands as needed within the class. And that kind of works on a tiered approach. So Community Living sends in a special needs resource consulting. They may come back and say, we need to do enhanced support for maybe 10 hours over the course of 4 weeks to build the capacity within the room to integrate that child into the class and be successful with that. And then there's funding to the child care center to support the additional staffing.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Again, not a criticism of the city. I have some skepticism about the model, but again, that would be directed to the province, so I'll leave it there. I found it really interesting toward the end of the report, there was talk of how the Canada-wide early learning childcare system, and how through its implementation, that childcare providers are reporting that it has negatively impacted their ability to retain and recruit qualified staff. And I read that part and I understood it. But my wonder that I'm left with is I know staff are working hard, but is there any advocacy that council can be doing to help with this? Because it sounds like, great intention, but maybe it's not playing out how it was intended to. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think there certainly are, I know Council has been very vocal on various items. I think even recently in Council meeting 2 days ago, there are some kind of provincial tables, obviously AMO, but also our kind of Ontario Municipal Service Manager table, or OMSA. And I know there is definitely a lot of conversation around how we can, as service managers and as municipalities, put forward some advocacy at the same time with the same language on these issues. Because again, I know this is maybe a bit of a broken record, but we are seeing exactly the same issues in every city because of the way the system has been set up or is continuing to be built while we try to implement. So I think there could be a role for council to either, share some of those concerns through council mechanisms. And I know staff is happy to provide some direction on what that could look like, and also utilize maybe some of that provincial wording and provincial, it's Thursday night, the provincial kind of advocacy groups and using kind of the same language. Because I think that's the only way, I think, to really have made the voices heard as loud as possible. I also think, and I know that's why we thought it would be important to bring this report, the system is really complicated. This is the licensed part. There is obviously unlicensed childcare. There is different models. There's people that are part of CWELC, people that are not part of CWELC. It's very complicated. I can only imagine how complicated this is for parents to navigate. So I think, and I'm kind of going off a tangent here, but I do think ultimately, yes, I think it would be possible for council to maybe add their voice, and staff is happy to support. So let us know.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And yeah, same. On this side, we're happy to support it however we can. So just please do keep us informed. Mr. Chair, I just have one more question. I found the part of the report talking about non-compliance, and that was really also very striking. Would you be able to talk a bit more about that? And there was I think it was POI, but I can't remember what that means. I was just wondering if you could touch on that for us, please. Thank you.
I will do a quick intro, and then Ms. Mitchell can talk a little bit more about some of the details. But I think we just, again, wanted to be really honest about, the different roles of different kind of jurisdictions. So the ministry holds is licensing childcare, and it has certain expectations with the licensing. And as you know, you were informed, I think, a few weeks ago that there was a center that the ministry had to step in. We don't really, as a city, typically get involved unless we're being asked. And if we're being asked, that's typically not a good thing. And this is when, and I know Heather can talk about the role of the PIO, but we have a staff on our team that actually works with centers, ideally to make it from an amazing center to an even better center, but sometimes, unfortunately, in helping with some of these concerns and compliance challenges. Ultimately, it's never the city's responsibility or role to be part of any of those decisions, but we are obviously receiving administrative funding to support centers in being good service providers. But I don't know, Heather, if you would like to speak a little bit about what the PIO role or the Program Integrity Officer does, because I think it's good for members of council to have that awareness as well.
Thank you. We have a Program Integrity Officer on staff, and her role is to help build capacity within the center for staffing, to train some staff, assist them with the pedagogical framework within the room, also to assist with some of the issues that may arise in terms of licensing. So if a center is struggling with the licensing branch, Ministry of Education's licensing branch, and not in compliance with certain things, she will go in and support, whether that be around policy, maybe it's around meal planning, any number of issues that arise. And she's there to support with that. She does routine visits to childcare centers, does drop-ins just to see how things are operating, makes herself available. She holds community of practice on a regular basis. And of late, what has happened is we do have, and it's unfortunate, we do have less than a handful of childcare providers who have a number of very serious high-risk violations, some of them several violations, that have brought the Ministry of Education's licensing branch to our door to say, can you help them? Can you send someone in to support them, to help them build their program, to improve their staffing capacity, do some training, help model some behaviors, talk about what maybe needs to be improved within the room. And we have been part of those discussions, not just with the ministry, but with those childcare centers. So the ministry is essentially, will come the first time and ask us if we'll support. They'll ask us to join the meeting. We'll join the meeting, and they will make it optional to the operator to engage with us and access the services that we're able to provide. And then there have been those occasions of late where they have come back with that specific operator to us for another meeting and made it mandatory that the operator engage with us and access that Program Integrity Officer to support their program and help improve the quality of care that's being offered to children. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. That sounds really challenging. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, really, and in particular families who have to deal with the fallout of that. I will leave it at that for now. Thank you both for your responses and your thoughtful report as well. Thanks.
Councillor Rosanek, do you still have any questions?
Yes, thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. And thanks to Councillor Stephen for the questions, a lot of the questions I had as well. Thanks, staff, for saying that all the cities are in the same spot. That was going to be one question, if Kingston's in a harder spot compared to like Belleville or other cities. It looks like all the cities are struggling with this. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And then on the bottom of page 1, where it says that we're waiting, like the pending update of funding allocations and guidelines in 2024. So we're expecting, is this basic, is like the update of funding allocations, is this referring to table 2 on page 14, or what update to funding allocations are we expecting this year?
So the childcare, the Minister of Education is funding service managers for for various kind of budget envelopes to support the childcare sector, either through operating dollars for the childcare operators, child subsidy, et cetera. So, and we've obviously kind of laid out the different components of that in this report. The Canada or the CWELC program that was rolled out came obviously with different funding allocations, and it has continued to evolve. So basically, there was an existing, and Heather can jump in here, but there was an existing childcare formula and model in place. Then with the Canada-Ontario agreement, CWELC was rolled out. And now the next step or the next iteration is to get to a new kind of funding formula, because there's all these different buckets of funding and expectations and outcomes that are all being shared with the service managers for service provision. But it's been quite frankly pretty challenging to manage that and to make sure that providers are being supported, and also obviously we are able to expand services, etc. I think again that goes back to some of the fast-paced implementation of CWELC a few years ago and kind of the phased approach, and now being in kind of a bit of the reality of the sector challenges and needs moving forward. So we are waiting for some further direction from the province. I think we were told September, right, Heather? 2024, where we could anticipate that magical new funding formula. And that will really hopefully help us to stabilize the sector and really have a good understanding of what the future looks like. We have been able to support some expansion with some of the CWELC funding, and we're obviously continuing to be as creative as possible to support the sector, but we're kind of working in a bit of a unknown, knowing that the formula will change again. So, and I know we can spend hours to talk about all the details, but it impacts, for instance, the utilization of administrative funding. It changes expectations about how certain envelopes can be used or can't be used. And I know, the bigger picture of that may not look very different, but in reality and in operating a model, it can really change the landscape. If the administration goes from 5% to 2.5%, for instance, we can maybe not support all of the staff, or there's just kind of big implications that we are just really, it's kind of unsure where we're going with that. Okay. Again, that's where I think some advocacy and some ongoing pressure or realities of what we see on the ground in communities will be helpful. I don't know, Heather, if you would like to add.
I think if I were going to add anything, I think it's the challenge that we face with the Ministry of Education in terms of getting information and getting it quickly. I have had this portfolio for 3 years, and every year they promise that we will have our next year's guideline in October, and we never see it until December. So we are left with, less than 2 to 3 weeks to implement a funding formula, to communicate with operators, knowing that there's going to be 2 weeks of vacation in there as well, right, over the Christmas break, and we're flying by the seat of our pants regularly with this. As municipalities, CMSMs, we have been strongly advocating with the ministry that they need to allow more time. They have indicated to us that there will be a significant change to the funding formula coming in September. They have not given us any indication of what that looks like. We have asked that we have at least 3 months' notice as to what that looks like, and that they also are allowing another 3 months, because we have to then prepare our operators for that as well, and they have to adjust their businesses accordingly. And potentially there are significant impacts for operators. Quite frankly, I anticipate that those who will see the biggest challenges will be those who are not enrolled in the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system.
Thank you so much for providing that context. Yeah, I think it's really sad how on page 13, the operators, just to try to keep up with the extra operating expenses and paying their staff, that they have to fundraise to support payroll obligations. Like, that just seems so wrong. And Councillor Stephen, thanks for asking the question about the 34% spaces that are being used and why it's only 34%. Where right now we have service agreements with 34 licensed childcare operators. Is that pretty consistent throughout the years, or have we seen the number of licensed childcare operators go down?
The number of operators has actually increased. The number of centers has increased. We've seen growth.
Okay.
When we talk about those vacant spaces, I think it's important to note that for those full-day programs, the infants, the toddlers, the preschoolers, and those kinder programs, for our CWELC operators, who are the majority, they are all, with the exception of a handful, reporting that they're operating at full capacity. I think there's probably in total about 50 vacant spaces within those full-day programs.
Okay. All right, thank you. And for that table 2 on page 14, so where it talks about the allocated space, how come in 2025 we're forecasting that there's no change, like there's not going to be any expansion? Is there a reason why it's like 0 across in 2025?
Thank you, Councillor Sanik. This chart is speaking to what the ministry is allocating us for expansion. This is what the Ministry of Education is allowing the City of Kingston to expand. And so they are not allowing any expansion for us in 2025. Last year, they allowed us 23 community-based spaces. Our expansion far exceeded that. I believe I reported back to them that we expanded spaces by about 140 within the community. We had Boys and Girls Club expand about 105 spaces. We had Unity Childcare Centers expand 64. So we far exceeded what we were allowed in community-based spaces. That said, we were working within the allocation of CWELC that we had. So we were the funding formula was very different last year for CWELC operators, where we had to reconcile to actuals. So we were able to maneuver those dollars to support those additional spaces. This year, we're cutting it close. We're able to continue to fund. But we have 67 spaces this year, and it'll probably get tight if we have operators who are looking to expand beyond the 67.
I see. Okay. I know that the childcare is really complicated, and that was even before they implemented CWELC. I remember some ARC meetings where it was like really complicated to figure this out. But basically, then the bottom line is that like an operator of one of the childcare daycares called me a few months ago, and she just wanted me to know how difficult it is for the operators to function right now, which is pretty evident in the report on as described on page 13. And I think she was kind of hinting that like they need more support from the city, and it almost seemed like they were hinting that like they need more subsidy, like it would have to to survive it wouldn't be a subsidy like through funding from the province, that we might have to add it to the city's operating budget, like out of our property tax dollars. Like that's probably not something that we really want to do. It would set a precedent, and we would have to do it every year thereafter. I don't know. Have you kind of heard that too, or other cities? Have they already started doing that? Are you aware of? It's just all funding that we do get from the province,
Yeah,
and that we try to best manage. Is that the best answer?
That is part of the answer. Thank you for your question, Councillor Osanik. And it's definitely something we hear and see across the province. As a city, as a service manager, we have you've just gone through your budgets process. There is a municipal contribution. It's about $1.5 million annually that goes towards the childcare sector from taxpayer dollars.
Okay.
There's also, again, an expectation from the province to co-fund some of that. So that 1.5 is also to kind of leverage, again, the provincial dollars. We also do have that shared agreement with the county because there is obviously services that go towards the county. So there is a bit of a chargeback from the county towards towards kind of the offset of the cost. But yes, to your point, I think there is obviously the provincial allocations that we receive and that we then provide to the sector in the different envelopes and different kind of programs that are delivered. We also, and I think with the rollout of, for instance, the Seabelt program, there were some expectations for those that signed up to be eligible around their operation. So, and I'm kind of a little blurry on the dates, but when Seabelt was rolled out, those that opted in also had to freeze their rates on a certain date and utilize kind of the quote-unquote average rate for Kingston. So I think it has just really impacted some of the business operations of childcare centers that opted in. I think that's, the conversation around like the $10 a day care, that how it was kind of portrayed in practice, in the implementation definitely looks a little bit different. And as the report kind of shows, has impacted or is impacting some of the centers' business model. And again, we're doing our best to support. Obviously, council could always decide to allocate more municipal dollars towards this sector. However, yes, I think you're then correct that is something you would need to continue to do because it's an ongoing issue. I think continuing to share these realities with the province, come up with creative ways of supporting the sector is right now, I think, what we can do. And there's some really good stuff. I hope that also came out in the report. There's some really great work happening with partners, with the sector itself, lots of education and training, and it's a fantastic sector. The folks that work in the sector are passionate, they work hard, they do an amazing job, and they're raising our most vulnerable parts, our community, and it's the future of our community. So I also think that, yes, it's hard, but the folks that work in the sector work there because they love it, and they, are really passionate and dedicated. So we also need to, I think, focus on that. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. And through you, Mr. Chair, I just have one other question. And that was, I know I had a question, maybe two questions sent to me by parents this summer saying that they really needed daycare. I think it was like before and after school program in one of the schools in my district. And when they didn't get it because there was no space, the daycare said, talk to your counselor. And then I know it came to you, and then, staff gave an excellent answer saying that it's not in our control. It was because the Ministry of Education, had a ratio and they didn't increase something it came back to the province. And so in those sort of situations, the bottom line really is that the parents should be complaining to our MPP, correct? Because I would always send it to staff just to get your input, but really it sounds like even though some daycares might say, talk to your city councilor, it's really nothing that we can do to try to increase spaces at a particular daycare center. or before after school program.
No, absolutely, Councillor Osanek. We would want to direct them to the MPP's office. I hold
Yes.
bi-monthly meetings with with the operators as a group. And back in the summer, we had invited MPP Shoe's office to attend a meeting so that childcare operators could share their concerns, express their views, talk about what was going on with their sector, how it was impacting them. They spent a couple of hours with the childcare operators. We took great notes. We sent those off to MPP Shoe's office. He has written a letter of advocacy to the ministry itself. He has done a video recently with regards to the concerns about how the sector is hurting right now as a result of the government's policies. So it's been a really good relationship between the sector and the MPP's office. But the more that parents are directing their concerns to the MPP's office, the better, quite frankly.
Excellent, thank you. I know that a lot of people come to us first because we're accessible. Our phone number is right there on the internet, you know, but I find that more and more issues that are sent to us as counselors are out of our control. It's not in the municipal government realm. So thank you so much for these answers.
Councillor Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, thank you to staff for this great report. And this is of great interest to me, and not just because I have a little guy that's in daycare right now. So Councillor Osanek and Councillor Stephen asked most of the questions I was going to ask. Yeah, I know, you guys killed it. So I just have one that wasn't touched on, and that is the Centralized Child Care Registry and Information System, the CCRIS, which, if I'm understanding correctly, is the waiting list or the registry for people who are waiting to access these services. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Ridge. Yes. The Centralized Child Care Registry Information System is a tool that we provide to operators and to families to register their children for childcare. So operators control their own wait lists through that tool. And then families have the option to register at any number of sites for any number of programs for their children. We had the company that holds that technology is called OneHSN. I'll be quite honest that, you know, for a number of years, this technology has not been leveraged the way it needed to be. It has been quite a mess. We embarked on a cleanup of that system and are still working through that slowly because the system has the potential to give us some really great data and information that we just have not been able to glean from it. So we're working on getting that together so that we can come back with really good data and numbers with regards to the number of unique children, the number of vacancies, how quickly families are able to move through that list, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you touched on a number of points that I was going to talk about, like ensuring that our systems are there, that the system that we are using is there for data collection, solid data collection, so that we can assess the information and then pivot if we need to in terms of for operational success. The other thing that I've heard from quite a few people, frankly, family, friends, or friends who are around my age and they're having their first child, is that that list has not been very helpful for them in terms of like putting themselves on it. I mean, my wife and I, we put ourselves on it as soon as we found out that Zoe was pregnant, and it did not yield any results. We had to quickly go and like really start going and going to every daycare to find a spot, and we were fortunately were successful with that. Is that something that you've been seeing a lot or hearing a lot in terms of that list? I'm glad to hear that you're working to clean that up, but I'm just curious if that's something that you've been hearing a lot of.
Thank you, and we're definitely, you're not the first one that is sharing that, Councillor Rich, so appreciate that. And I think to Heather's point, like we are really, and I feel like this is a broader kind of conversation as the service manager managing various provincial programs and really using 2024 to stabilize, to really get a good data integrity in place. And unfortunately, this is where, sometimes we can control that directly, and sometimes it really depends on how the sector is utilizing the system. So yes, we still hear, stories about folks that have not received a call or may have to do some personal advocacy by calling various centers. And in an ideal world, that would not have to happen, and we would have everybody using the system effectively, efficiently, and that requires some further work as well on accountability, audits, and kind of really having a firm, kind of expectation as a funder. But again, we're also balancing like a sector that's under a lot of pressure. So yes, we're aware. We have made a lot of progress, but there still is quite a bit of work to do to further get to that one-stop shop and no kind of other ways of finding childcare. And of course, if we would have ample childcare available everywhere, this would be a very smooth system. Unfortunately, we're also, and I feel like I'm always comparing this with our social housing wait list and our by name list. It's all like kind of a bit of the same pressure point of we're doing our best, but we need to still continue to push for good data and providers utilizing the data, inputting the data, and us as a service manager continue to really prioritize that as well. And I think, sorry, and one more thing I will say is, because I'm really excited to talk about this today instead of housing, is getting more of this out to council and the community for some education purposes and really showing how we're doing and maybe some advocacy on why things are hard. I think it's important for the community to understand. It might also help council with, when constituents reach out to you, not to always push the, envelope or push the issue to a different level of government, because there are things we can do. But I think it's also important to continue to explain our jurisdiction and ability to change.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, please don't take my very meandering question / personal anecdote as in front. I know you're doing an amazing job. Staff's doing an amazing job, and as you said, there are just so many different pressure points here. So thank you again for answering my question about the list, and yeah, that will be it for me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I will agree that this is a very important portfolio for everyone, especially parents, and especially single parents, no matter the gender, as I speak as one as well. So I know how important this can be. Actually all my questions have been taken, asked, and answered. I do have one follow-up question to Councillor Rosanik's question about the no increase in 2025. I'm just wondering, would we be able to use some of those underutilized 3,000 spaces to cover that no increase in 2025?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I know this allocation was the allocation that was provided to us from the province based on kind of some of the information that we put forward. I think we are a little bit unsure how this actually came about ultimately and how this allocation came back to us. And Heather is nodding, so I'm not making this up. So I think, again, I would kind of, we're happy to kind of, and we continue to bring things back to the province on a staff level as well. If we, for instance, say, hey, we have the ability to expand, like the licensing piece on the kind of the empty licenses that we alluded to in the report, the discrepancy, This would not, it's not necessarily apples to apples. This would be, but I think it could be we could always make the case saying, well, this is similar in every community, but we have so many licensed spaces that are not utilized. We have a center that's willing to expand, interesting to expand. Like, could we add more spaces? I think it never hurts to ask. But it also ultimately does come back to that funding allocation that we're eagerly awaiting for and what that then actually means, because we also want to make sure that we can actually fund centers. I guess what I'm saying is we can always try to influence this, and we continue to, but we also want to make sure that we actually have operators that can do it and can run a business.
Okay, thank you. It was just a thought I had during that conversation, so I just thought I'd share it. So, Mr. Clerk, actually, any more questions from the councillors? We're done. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone in the public?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no members of the public present.
Okay, thank you. So this is only a report for information only, so thank you, staff. There are no motions, there are no notions of motions, there are no other business, there's no correspondence. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, April 17th, 2024, at 6 p.m., which brings us to the end of our agenda. So if I could have a mover and second for adjournment, Councillor Sanik and Councillor Stephen. All those in favor? Thank you very much. I call the meeting at 6:51. Thank you. Have a good night.